I encountered a most disturbing video 3 weeks ago. Then I encountered this gentleman. Who is this? This is Pastor Mark Blitz. He has a little Messianic church there in near Spokane, Washington, Bonnie Lake, Washington. He's a Jewish man, Jewish family. He loves the Lord. He's a Messianic Jew, which means he believes that Jesus is Messiah. 7-8 years ago, he starts this fellowship near Spokane, Washington, for the purposes of showing and teaching the Jewish roots and heritage of the New Testament in our walk. Can I just let you know that you and I all have biases? You're not surprised by that, are you? If you're not careful, your church bias will blind us or make us insensitive to there were 4,000 years of Jewish culture and tradition before the church showed up. Are you okay with that? Is it wise for us then to embrace, look at, study, and learn from the Old Testament? And that's what Mark does. These are lunar phases of a lunar eclipse. Okay? I didn't know this, but when a full lunar eclipse is happening, in other words, you see the full circle of the moon, and when the shadow of the earth passes in front, the moon doesn't technically black out. What happens is the sun shining around the earth illuminates the darkened face, and it becomes red in appearance, and for centuries has been known as a blood moon. Up one more, if you would. Here's a great example of this. This was February, you guys, of this year. That is a total lunar eclipse over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. That is a blood moon. Everybody okay with that? Now up here, this is a solar eclipse where the moon moves in front of the sun. Notice its appearance. And it never occurred to me that the book of Joel, in Joel chapter 2, I think it's verse 31, that in the very end times, at the end of the tribulation, when Jesus is about to return to planet Earth and take rightful rule and reign, that the sun will become as sackcloth, which is a black material, and the moon will turn to blood. However, a full solar eclipse, what does that look like to you? A sun blackened. So down just a little bit. So Mark Blitz said something absolutely astounding and fascinating. Next slide. Now what this is, you guys, this is out of the book of Leviticus. Now we are not Jews, and we are not Messianic Jews, and so we typically could care less about the 7 feasts of God. God said in Leviticus 23, keep these feasts. The first one is Passover. Second one is unleavened bread. Passover is on the 14th month of Nisan, and God calls this the first month. That is our April and May. Unleavened bread happens the day that Passover gets started. Unleavened bread, which unleavened means no sin. And then, of course, first fruits. God says, find the Passover, find the next Saturday or Sabbath, and the very next day, always the day after Saturday is? Sunday, and that's the first fruits. What day was Jesus crucified on? Passover. The Last Supper was the Passover supper, the Seder dinner. Was Jesus without sin? And what day did he rise on? Well, fine, Saturday. The next day is what? He rose on, guess what? The feast of because Jesus is the first fruits of them that died. Point being, these festivals and feasts, God says, we think of feasts, we think of food, and who doesn't? But what it is actually the word is appointment, assembly, and if you will, dress, rehearsal. Jesus fulfilled these to the day. Then 50 days later, after Passover, Nisan 14, comes Pentecost. That was weird. All these other feasts, you're supposed to use unleavened bread. Except for the Feast of Pentecost. You're supposed to use leavened bread. Did a bunch of sinners get saved in Jesus? Yes. When was the church born? On what feast? Do you remember? Pentecost. The second chapter of the book of Acts is a fulfillment of something God prophesied way back with Moses, 1500 BC. Now, what about these here? The fall feasts. Have they been fulfilled yet? The answer is not yet. These are prophetic of Jesus' return. There'll be some trumpets. Hey, we read about that this morning. Then atonement. I got to tell you about the Day of Atonement. That's in Leviticus 16. This is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. It always is to follow on the 10th day of the month of Tishri. 10th day. Now the Jews, they say that this is their first month. God says, no, this is my first month. They say, okay, Lord, but we're still going to have this as our first month. So trumpets is also known as Rosh Hashanah. That happens usually our end of September, early October. So the Jewish New Year is this one. And what's God's calendar? No, this is the first of the year. But anyway, so the Jews say, no, we want to do this. So they do. Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah is on the 1st. On the 10th is Atonement. And then on the 15th, says the book of Leviticus, comes Tabernacles. Well, there's your blood moon right there. That is his total lunar eclipse. And this is what Mark Blitz shared with me a 3 weeks ago. It blew my mind. He was noticing, remember the picture of the blood moon over the Dome of the Rock? He got to looking at that, and he said, blood moon. The moon is blood. Solar eclipse. Yeah. So he got a hold of the NASA website that you can get a hold of, and he noticed that the NASA, they're pretty cool with their computers, they detail the next billion years, or whatever it is, of solar and lunar eclipses. But one you're going to have, in the year 2014, there's going to be a total eclipse on October the 8th. And then in 2015, in April 4th, there's going to be another eclipse, and so on. And then 2015, I'm meaning lunar eclipse, excuse me. Total lunar eclipse on April 15th in 2014. And 2014 on October 8th. And then in 2015, April 4th. And then in 2015, there's going to be September 28th. And we say, yes, so here's what Mark Blitz did. Next slide. He got his 2014 Jewish calendar out. See, here's let me see if I got this right now. The brown is our Gregorian calendar. The blue is the Jewish calendar. If you look at April 15th in 2004, guess what day that is? Oh, it's Passover. And Mark went, well, isn't that interesting? And then in that same year, slide it up now, the NASA site said, well, yeah, October the 8th, but he got his Jewish calendar out and he says, hey, wait a minute, that's Tabernacles. What's the first of the feasts? Passover. What's the 7th feast? Tabernacles. He went, next slide. Now there's 2 more lunar eclipses. They're going to happen in succession in the year 2015. He looked at those dates and he went, wait a minute, April 4th in 2015 is Passover again. Slide it up. And he looked at it and he went, wait a minute, and then in that's going to be September, there's Tabernacles again. In other words, this is where it gets confusing. The Jews reckon their time, their year, beginning on trumpets or Rosh Hashanah, our September, early October. That's when their new year begins, okay? For instance, right now, did you know that we are in what's called the Shemitah year? I have a lot of fun on AskMoses.com. You can talk to a rabbi live. This is the Shemitah year. What? Remember I said they work 6 years and they take the 7th off and then the cycle begins again? Did you know that the Jews are observing the Shemitah, the 7th year of rest, which means in September 29th of this year, this fall, a new year begins, but not just any new year, a new what? Week begins. A Levitical week. Do you remember the 70th week of Daniel, the 7-year Great Tribulation? Question to you. Will Daniel's 70th week, that 7-year period that the book of Revelation talks all about, will that, do you suppose, coincide with the typical week of the Jewish reckoning? I believe it does.